If I cast my mind back to the 70s, young apprentice.
Geez, how old are you?
Yeah, let's not worry about that. These were the type of figures that Kenner made. 5 points of articulation, which meant that they had 5 joints that moved. Usually the tops of the legs, the 2 shoulders, and the head. Now, that was the staple for action figures for a very long time. You don't like playing with these much, do you?
No, not really.
What do you prefer?
I prefer vintage collection and stuff like that because it has a bunch of articulation for if you're doing big stories and you want them to like jump and then fall, you have to make them have good articulation.
So they're way more poseable.
Yes.
Okay. When we return, we're going to have a look at possibly what is the demise of the 5 points of articulation figures from Hasbro. Back in a minute. So as I said, back in the 70s and 80s, 5 points of articulation was the thing of the day, and Kenner released a whole swag of figures now known as vintage Kenner Star Wars figures with 5 points of articulation. So you had the 2 joints at the top of the legs, you had the 2 joints at the shoulders to allow the arms to go up and down, and you had a head joint to allow the head to rotate. Jump forward and we now have some very articulate figures that you can set up in lots of different poses. What do you think is the bonus of that?
That they can do a lot of different things than the ones in the 70s, so they can have all different bending positions.
So there's like ball joints that allow the arms to go sideways, the wrists turn, the knees turn, the feet turn, obviously the hips. The waist can turn, yeah.
Now they've got the top so that can turn like that.
Yep, so the torso can rotate and a head, of course. But it doesn't mean that every figure that's come out since 1995 has had multiple points of articulation. And if we jump forward, here's a Rogue One figure, and it still only has 5 points of articulation. A lot more detail in these, and a lot more posability, I guess, if you look at the way that the heads can ball joint around. This one in particular, a Mimban Stormtrooper with bent elbows. They're already pre-bent. But they put in little bits of extras so that the hands, for instance, can rotate so that you can hold the weapons properly and pose them. But they're still very limited in their articulation. What we now have and what we're now looking at are these. What's this one, mate?
That is a vintage collection figure, the Incinerator Trooper.
Yep, the Incinerator Trooper, and there's a whole range of vintage collection figures with multiple points of articulation. The difference is the cost of something like this one
is way higher.
Yeah, so the vintage collection figures in this country retail at about $27, $29, and the 5 points of articulation figures, if you like, they weren't $5. I wish they were. No, they were a lot more, but they weren't anywhere near as pricey as these. It's a very expensive figure, but because of the articulation. And I think probably the way Hasbro are wanting to go is to give their figures a little bit more life so that you can set up toy photography and pose them. And so if children are playing with them, they have bendable knees so they can fit into cockpits and things like that.
So what are we going to do now with all of the 5 points of articulation? Are we going to continue or are we just going to stop it?
Well, I believe, and a lot of collectors around the world also believe, that when these figures hit the market, and we're looking at 2019, these were supposed to spell the death knell for 5 points of articulation. They are gold-coloured figures, and they chart each of the movies with a couple of figures from each movie. So you've got back to 1977 with the original Star Wars A New Hope, right up to these ones, which are 2019, which is The Rise of Skywalker. So there's a couple of figures in each pack, which, you know, good value for money. Some beautiful artwork on them, some foil finished and very thick cardstock.
Wow.
But everyone thought that these were going to be the last of the 5 points of articulation. So do you think kids would want to play with a figure that's only got 5 points of articulation but then is painted gold?
No.
Why?
Because why would they have a gold figure and you would think that kids would play with it? It would just basically look like you're playing with a gold brick. Or a
You
gold
want to see
rock.
the detail. And
You want
wanna
to see the
colour.
detail. So when you're actually playing, you can make it feel like it's an actual story. It's not like you're just playing with a gold bar.
Yeah, well, it's not like it's an award for something.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to play with an award.
No.
So in the end, what really is going to work is figures that have articulation and a beautiful paint job, beautiful face sculpts, all that sort of thing. So was the gold figures the demise of the 5 points of articulation?
People thought so, but it wasn't.
Right. Why?
Because there is this whole range.
That's right. Celebrate the
figures.
Saga. Here we go. In 2020, Hasbro released Celebrate the Saga. Now, these are 5 points of articulation figures, but of course they're in a multi-pack. So just like the gold figures, you get more than one figure. These were more expensive, of course, and a little bit exclusive in some countries. But realistically, what you got in here was repeats of a lot of the figures we already have on card, but as a group, and they clustered them together. This is the First Order, there's the Bounty Hunters, the Sith, and so on. There were 8 in total. And for most collectors, these are repeats. We already have most of these figures. For kids, it's great, because if you rip these open, you can play with a lot of different figures, and you only had to make one purchase. The beauty for collectors was that sometimes they came with additional droids or a figure that had not been released before. Sometimes you got a droid that looked similar to a droid we've had, but with different paintwork and a different name, and therefore it is a different droid. So these came out after the ones that were supposed to be the end of the 5 points of articulation. If you were to rate the 5 points of articulation, and we're looking back at figures that have a little bit more detail and a little bit more paintwork and better weapons and all that sort of thing, what would you give them?
I'd probably give them a 4.
Yep. And the 4 being for what reason?
Because they all have beautiful paint jobs,
Yep.
including very old ones.
Yep.
They're all a nice range, but the thing that I don't like about them is the articulation. They could have just done a little bit more, like made it so that, like on some figures, their arms could just bend around here, or their legs could just bend so they can sit in vehicles.
And don't forget also, that doesn't mean that there won't be any more 5 points of articulation figures, because we also have Everything Old is New Again, the retro collection. So the retro collection are mimicking the original ones, and of course collectors know that if you're looking at these off the card, you're looking for the backs of the legs where it says 1983 versus 2019 or 2020 in the case of these. And of course this line is still going. So we have the retro collection on carded figures imitating the
They
5
are
points of
still
articulation.
the same though, the exact same figures
Essentially,
basically.
they've come out of the same mould, and obviously they're the Kenner and now the new Hasbro Disney versions of the same. So that sort of wraps up 5 points of articulation for us. We know that it's not a dead duck yet, but Hasbro are doing everything they can to try and create as much interest in the more modern figures, particularly things like the Mandalorian, and also the figures that have more articulation. They're going back through some of these as back catalogue ones and re-releasing them for a lot of collectors who didn't pick them up the first time round. Annoying for people like myself that are completists, because I have them, but they make them different on the back, so it's just enough of a difference for a completist to have to say, well, I still have to get those as well. So if people want to see more of the videos we've got, what do they need to do?
Like, subscribe, and if you do subscribe, I get $1. And also follow us on Instagram.
That's right, Darth Aussie, at Darth Aussie. Yep.
Yep, and also Goodies Toys.
Our
If
affiliate.
you buy something that is 99 or up, then you'll get free postage in Australia.
That's right. Our affiliate is Goodies Toys. Great place to shop. He has an online store and an eBay store. Pictures on the screen now of both of those stores. Go in and have a look. First quality and a great guy to deal with. And if that's for, you know, anything like the vintage collection, your Black Series, or even the retro collection, Goodies Toys is the place to go. That's it from us today. I'm going to say, may the force be with you.
May the force be with you.